Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 25.8 Midlane Tierlist. So, if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a lot of changes towards mid lane this patch, and the rise of Roa has really shifted things around. The main nerfs were to the champions such as Syndra, Ahri, Annie, all received pretty hefty nerfs. Yone received a pretty sizable nerf, and then we saw some buffs towards some champions which had kind of fallen out of the meta, the likes of Zoe, Mel, Hui, Zeref have all been buffed, and most of them have moved a substantial margin. Let's get into it. So the DT is going to consist of relatively similar champions. We lead off with Smolder, who has, like Tristana, who I'm actually going to place next to him, been pushed out of the mid lane intentionally. They're still viable to an extent if you're very comfortable with them and you need like an AD champion to pair alongside like an AP pick within the jungle. But it's mostly like going to be more performant in like elite queue or in competitive, which is where these champions can still to an extent exist. Same goes for Corki. All three of these champions have had their kits pretty heavily adjusted to try and push them back into bot lane, but are still mid lane options if you do want to opt into them. They're just not going to be as performant or as consistent as some of the other AD options within the mid lane. Alongside these three champions, we still have the likes of Ziggs, who is still one of the more underperformant mid laners at the moment. He's really suffering from the fact that Ludens is probably the weakest of the mage items at the moment. This champion really could do with some sort of just buff, I believe, straight up. He isn't that performant in the bot lane at the moment either. But if Ludens got buffed, I could definitely see this champion once again rising up as like an option if you do want to opt into it. But he's just not as consistent as some of the other picks at the moment, and he does remain as a D tier option in my opinion. Alongside Ziggs, we have Annie, who is quite weak at the moment. The champion got over nerfed. They are buffing it quite heavily in 25.9. So if you are looking to play Annie going into 25.9, then she will definitely be a bit stronger. She is receiving a hefty amount of damage, and the mana cost change to W going from I believe it's 90 to 110 to like 70 to 90 should be meaningful for enabling you to clear waves more consistently, and the Q damage is going up alongside that. So definitely pay attention to Annie going into next patch, but right now she is definitely weaker as a champion. They have tried to push her away from Tibbers being like really powerful, doing a huge amount of damage, more into just her baseline kit. She's going to have more burst potential, but Tibbers in extended fights is definitely not going to be as strong as a like unit summon as an option. So the other pick which actually has jumped out of the D tier is Mel. So Mel is now within my C tier. She got buffed this patch. She needed it. She'd been weak for a while, but Riot were trying to evaluate where she had landed as a champion. I'd still say she's on the weak side at the moment. Not a pick I would recommend playing, but if they were to buff her in the future, I can definitely see this champion rising up as a pretty solid option. Right now though, if you want to play her, I'd recommend using her as a counter pick option. If you're not comfortable playing her already, then you're probably not going to start playing her. I don't think the buffs were enough to kind of like solidify her as a LAN champion. Other picks within the C tier mostly remain the same. The likes of Azir is still a champion which, if you have put a lot of time into, can be performant. If you're not comfortable playing Azir, I would really advise against playing this champion. He requires a huge amount of games and mastery to really perform on, and even then, solo queue is not a great environment for him. He really performs quite substantially better in like controlled environments, which is why he's a very good competitive pick. The likes of Gangplank as a champion is very hard to play. If you can pilot him well, he can be rewarding. Right now, though, I think Gangplank is slightly on the weak side in general, and mid lane Gangplank, kind of akin to top lane, is just a hard champion to play. So if you already have the mastery on him, you'll probably continue to play him. If you don't, he's not a pick I'd recommend learning at the moment. Brand is just strictly weak. This champion in like both bot lane and mid lane, and even jungle and support to an extent, just isn't that performant at the moment for a pick which should be better for average play. I think he is definitely on the weaker side. I wouldn't recommend playing him at the moment, but if he gets buffed anytime soon, then he can definitely rise back up as a good option, as he is just innately elo skewed as a champion. Jace, kind of akin to Azir and Gangplank, is a very hard champion to play. If you want an AD pick within your pool, he can be good. He's not what I'd recommend as the first option though at the moment, as I do think he requires a lot of mastery, and the amount of mastery you need to get good results on him isn't quite as rewarding as maybe some of the other picks at the moment, which I'll talk about in a second. Same goes for Ambessa, a hard champion to play. If you're very comfortable playing Ambessa, you can continue to play Ambessa. If you're not comfortable playing Ambessa, you're probably still going to avoid playing this champion. I wouldn't recommend learning her at the moment. Play her if you can play her though. Aurora is a bit underperforming at the moment. I believe she is also struggling with Ludens not being a great item at the moment. If Ludens was to be buffed, I could definitely see this champion rising back up as a good mid lane option. She's relatively hard to play and tends to be more performant in elite and competitive. I wouldn't recommend her for like average play in solo queue, but if you're very comfortable on her, kind of akin to some of the other options here, she can definitely be a champion you continue to play. LeBlanc's win rate is obviously very deflated by the fact that a bunch of new people have started playing her because of her ASU. She's still a fine champion. If you're very comfortable on her, she will still get you results. If you're not, then she is going to require a lot of mastery. She is an AP assassin, very reliant on executing combos effectively to get good results, and if you're not comfortable doing that, then probably recommend other champions over her at the moment. And then the other two picks within the C tier are Twisted Fate and Gragas. These two picks still remain. In the case of Gragas, he's a fine mid laner. He's just a different playstyle and unpopular, which is what I would mark him down for. If you're very comfortable playing him though, he can still be a decent option if you are looking for something a bit more niche and like can do good AP burst. I think if some of his items were a bit stronger, he could definitely thrive, but right now I'd say his items are slightly too weak to really be as dominant as a mid lane option. And then Twisted Fate, I think this champion's like still high C. I think he needs a tiny bit more to really be like back as a mid lane option, but he's not bad. Like if you're comfortable playing Twisted Fate, you can still get good results. He's just got a bit less agency through damage, but more agency through like macro capabilities. You can control the map really comfortably on Twisted Fate, but it's about learning like your wave clear thresholds combined with what timers you can move on, which is the real depth of playing this champion. I think if you are comfortable playing it, then he can be good. I think if you're not, he's not a pick I'd recommend at the moment, but he's definitely worth watching because builds can pop up every so often, and like if he was to receive a buff, I could definitely see this champion rising back as a solid option. Moving on to the B tier then, we lead off with Asol, who is kind of like brand a bit too weak for the elo he's supposed to be best in. I think if you're comfortable giving away a lot of agency early on to the game and then getting a lot of power later on to the game, it can be rewarding. I think it's not as consistent of a way of climbing at the moment, which is why I don't really recommend him, but if you do enjoy that playstyle, I think he can be fine in that regard. I'd say he's a B tier pick, but if he was to receive any buffs, he can definitely shoot back up the tier list, as this is the kind of elo bracket where he does the best in. Some of your tank options include the likes of Scion and Malphite. I don't think these champs are bad, I just think they're slightly conditional, and you tend to be giving away a lot of agency if you are playing these options, but if your composition needs it, they can be good picks, and Malphite does have the ability to opt into AP in certain matchups, which can be decent. I think if some of their items were better, they could rise back up as like A tier picks, but right now though, I'd say they're just solid B tier options. I wouldn't recommend them, but if you find the right spots, they can be good options. Zed, Talon, Kiana, these are all very like OTP dependent champions. If you're comfortable playing them, you should still be able to get results. I don't think any of these picks are per se bad at the moment. You just need to have good amounts of mastery and depth on them to really get the most out of these champions. They're all good and elite, and they tend to be, to an extent, elite skewed as hard to execute champions. Not picks I'd recommend, but picks that if you are comfortable on can get you good results. Honestly, you could bracket things like Fears, who I think is a bit more conditional as a counter pick, like an AP option. Katarina, Akshan can all follow in a similar vein of thought. I think Katarina very much like goes from like a D tier champion to like an S tier champion just on like mastery alone. Like this champion can be incredibly powerful in this elo if you are like smurfing, or if you're very comfortable like knowing the margins of what you can do and executing like the champion well. But I think if you're first time with the champion, she is one of the first time champions, one of the worst first time champions in the game. She really struggles when you don't really understand what you want to achieve on this champion, as she is very unique in the way she wants to play the game. Lissandra I have within the beta. I think she's a good counter pick option. She's a little on the weak side at the moment, but if you find the right spot, she can be rewarding. I don't really recommend her at the moment, but yeah, she can be rewarding in the right spots. Akali sits within the beta. I think she's good. I think Akali is a good option, a bit easier to play than some of the other assassin options as well, a bit more mainstream as like as an option. I'd recommend looking and using resources to like really understand where the strength of the champion lies and how to execute her combos effectively, and after a certain amount of time then bring it into solo queue and just seeing how like well you can perform with the champion. I think she's a good option just to have within your arsenal, as I think she can be picked up a bit easier easier than some of these other options. But if you haven't put the time into her, I'd recommend some of the other options which are slightly higher up. She does have problems which just most assassins have, which is like the wave clear and the like not really being able to play from range, which obviously some of the mages in the higher tiers do have access to. Obviously, that is just a condition of playing assassins most of the time. The Rise and the Kassadin, I mean, these champions, I think, are fine at the moment. I think Kassadin has issues within his kit as well, tends to want to be brought out as a counter pick, but the buffs to Roa more recently did help him. I think the champion is a solid B tier option. He's pretty agnostic with Elo at the moment because obviously he's a scaling champion, but he does have depth in mastery. In the case of Rise, I think he's also a pretty solid counter pick option. Also benefited from Roa being buffed, and with the Roa nerfs going into 25.9, I think these two champions will probably be two of the most which suffer, as they don't really have that great fallback options. In the case of Rise, though, we have seen Roa-less Rise builds do well, so might be able to opt into some of the other options there if Roa nerfs end up being like as sizable as they are like telegraphed to be. Moving down from the A tier to the B tier is both Yone and Orianna. In the case of Orianna, she's just been underperforming for a while. I've kind of been hesitant dropping her from the A to the B tier because I do recommend Orianna as an option. I think she's a great mid laner for everyone to learn if you are comfortable playing her. But I think she's just fallen down a bit over time. She's being buffed in 25.9, like after a certain point within the game. I think it's very minimal. I don't think it will be enough of a shifter, but I might bump her back up from the top of B tier to the A tier if it ends up being enough of a power shift. In the case of Yone, though, he is dropping from the A tier to the B tier. The nerfs were sizable. It was a pretty chunky amount of damage to lose off W. That is one of his core training like tools early on into the game. You will just QW someone, or you will just W to like poke someone out of lane eventually, and losing some of that like threat within lane enables some champions to trade back easier against him, and he's just not going to be as, I mean, it's just a general nerf across all the games, so he's just going to be a weaker champion generalistically. I think it drops him from the A to the B tier, but he's still one of the better AD options if you are looking for like a general pick to go to. I would recommend Yasuo as like the primary one at the moment, and like Neferi tends to be a bit more low elo skewed as like a mid lane option, but Yone if you're looking for something a bit more competitive and elite, kind of like skewed as an option. Moving on to the A tier, then we lead off with Nico, who is still a decent champion. She's just unpopular as a mid lane option. I think she has great early game like poke tools. She has great in-gate like CC options through both her ultimate and her E. She has great tools for like roaming around the map and like making plays. I think this champion has a lot of things going for it. It doesn't scale as well as some of the other mage options, but as a pick, I think she is still a very solid A tier option. I think Silas is a great counter pick option at the moment. Wouldn't recommend blinding him, but the kind of like opt-in of Roa Silas, and we've seen some like grasp variations. I think he's doing quite well on it at the moment and has kind of like solidified himself as an A tier pick for this patch. I think going into the next patch, if Roa Silas ends up like taking a pretty big hit and people are still like going the build, he could probably drop down to the B tier, but for the moment going to remain as an A tier option. In case of Vex, she's a great counter pick. Wouldn't recommend blinding her. I think she does just have to come out in the right spots to really get like rewarded as an option. If you play her as a blind option, I think she drops down to like the B tier as a pretty mediocre option. But yeah, use her as a counter pick and you should be rewarded. I think Talia is a high A tier option at the moment. She's one of the best AP elite skewed mid laners though. She has access to great wave clear, and once you get to level 9, she's a very strong champion. Has great damage within her kit, great roaming tools, great CC. I think there's a lot of things going for this champion at the moment, but like for average play, doesn't tend to perform as well as an option. Heimerdinger, Quinn, Garen are all pretty niche mid lane options, but all within their own can perform really well. I think Quinn is an incredibly underrated mid laner, and I think like should be one of the higher A tier mid laners at the moment. Garen's nerfs did hurt him and do put him down as like a bit lower of an A tier option, and Heimerdinger is just a very niche mid laner, which is like a big strength of the champion because people just don't understand how to play against his perma shove power and his like random bursts of damage which he can sometimes output. In the case of Aurelia, still a good AD mid lane option. If you're comfortable playing her, you should get results. She's a very hard champion to play though. Like, you have to put a lot of time into her to really be rewarded. If you're just going to first time her in solo queue, she will be underwhelming compared to some of the other options within the mid lane here. Case of Pantheon, great counter pick option. I think blind Pantheon really struggles. especially if you're like just playing him into a mage and then you're just held in lane and then you get outscaled. That can be a big struggle of the champion, but he's like a 4-way flex pick, so that's always something that goes for the champion. And I think Pantheon, yeah, is a very solid like middle of the pack A tier option at the moment. In the case of Vel'Koz and Lux and Xerath for that matter, they are all really good artillery options. I have Xerath as probably the front runner at the moment. The buffs which he received in this going into this patch were nice, and I think it made up for some of the loss which he had in the previous patch because they took away some of his base damage. So Xerath, yeah, solid A tier option at the moment, but both Vel'Koz and Lux are pretty close options. Lux obviously is a bit shorter range, but has access to great wave clear, and her trading patterns can be really hard for certain picks to like work against. In the case of Vel'Koz and Xerath, though, they have great like artillery range damage, and it can be really hard for certain competitions to play into them. I wouldn't recommend blinding these picks, but if you can find the right angles, they are all very good A tier options. If you're looking for an assassin, I think Echo still a great option. This pick got buffed not too long ago, and it really helped him. It solidified him as a good A tier option within the mid lane. He has access to both Halo Blades and Electrocute as good keystone options, and if you could snowball games, this champion can really comfortably take over. He's a very powerful ultimate, and yeah, has great tools for diving in, doing a chunk of damage, and then backing out of the fight. I missed Zoe. She stays within the B tier. She was a low B tier option, and I still think the champion's very hard to play and get good value out of, but the buff she received this patch to her AoE on her Q really helped her. It enables her to wave clear a lot more consistently, and it was one of the bigger struggles of the champion, so I do think she jumps to the top of the B tier. She's a champion worth watching. I think she could jump all the way up to the A tier if, like with the Roa nerfs going into next patch. So yeah, worth watching as a champion. If you're comfortable like playing this pick, then I think you should definitely be playing it or practicing it at the moment, because the buffs were sizable enough to kind of like bring her back onto the map. And Hui is going to jump up to the A tier. He got buffed this patch, and the buffs were sizable. It was good base damage on his passive. The passive now scales a lot better, and the same for the ultimate. The ultimate gains some base damage and scales a lot better now. So Hui, champion, definitely worth like playing if you have him within your arsenal. He received sizable buffs, so he is back on the map as an option. Other picks within the A tier are the likes of Veigar, who is a really good low elo option. He obviously performs like considerably weaker as like an elite option, which is why he sits within the A tier. If this was exclusively low elo, I think this champion would be a good S tier option. I would recommend playing him at least if you are trying to get to the likes of Plat, Emerald, Diamond. But after that, I'd recommend looking for other options to add to your pool of champions. But as a one-trick option, I think Veigar can work perfectly fine, especially if you are very comfortable on the champion. Kayle, an incredibly underrated mid lane option. This pick has been performing really well as of recent. I say as recent, like ever since the beginning of the split, basically, she has been really dominant in both top and mid, especially as like a average elo option. I think she is one of the best scaling picks within the game still, and the buffs she received towards the end of last season really helped her going to the split as well. So Kayle solidified as a really good A tier option. I'd really recommend trying her if you haven't already, and if you're comfortable playing her, yeah, she should be able to gain you good wins. Victor sits as a high A tier option. The addition of like Roa Victor, as like an option for him, really helped him. Gives him some durability in games where he might have not been able to opt into it as easily. There's loads of different. Well, I mean, there's loads of different keystone options. You can opt into Airy or you can opt into Grasp a lot of the time. Those are traditionally like the two keystone options we see the most. But like the builds can be where the real strength of this champion lies at the moment. Whether you're opting into like the Blackfire variants. The Ludens tends to be a bit underperforming at the moment, but you can opt into things like Seraphs, you can opt into things like Roa, and gain some durability where you might have lost it through, I believe he lost some base health and some armor growth, so yeah, you can opt into some more durability now. And with Swain, I think this champion's one of the best counterpick options within the game. If you find the right games to play Swain, this champion is incredibly powerful. He is just conditional, and that kind of prohibits him from the S tier at the moment, but if he was like slightly stronger, this champion could just be an S tier option. I think this pick is an incredibly good spot at the moment, so definitely don't sleep on Swain. I think he's a great A tier option. Picks moving down are both Syndra and Ahri. In the case of Syndra, she received a sizable nerf. The goal here was to push her more towards burst builds, away from like the extended combat Cosmic Drive Blackfire builds. To an extent, it's done that. She's still going those builds though, but she is going to have access to a bit more burst, and her rotations aren't going to be as like strong as they once were. That being said, I think if Luzons was to be buffed, I think this champion can once again move back up to the A tier. She is by no means gone. She is just a bit weaker of an option now. Ari got sizably nerfed though. Ari definitely now sits as more like a mid to low A tier option. The nerfs to her base damage was sizable and didn't really gain back the damage as easily through like the AP builds, and the main thing is the fact that Roa is being nerfed in 25.9, which means that Ari is going to lose even more power. So Ari, definitely on the downwards at the moment. I'd recommend hopping off the champion if you are like kind of going into next patch looking for an option to play. If you're comfortable still playing her this patch and you are like kind of waiting for maybe Ludens to be buffed, I think this champion can maybe like jump back up, but the main thing is like Malignance is still going to be her main AP option. I think right now that is still an underperforming build for her, so she is going to remain as a low A tier option. Moving on to the S tier then, I don't know why I have Kennen here. We're going to lead off with... I'm going to lead off with Galio. I think Galio is probably one of the lower S tier options at the moment, just because he's more counterpick reliant, but as a utility mid laner, which is great into most AP picks, I think Galio is in a great spot for that at the moment. The main concern would be the rise of the likes of Yasuo, Neferi, Yone as like... I mean, they were already popular options, but even more popular options has hurt him. And I think you could argue for that he should probably be dropped down to the A tier, but I'm going to leave him as a low S tier option. So I think he's an easy to play, good counterpick option, and yeah, can very comfortably work on a low budget to really take over games still. I think Cassiopeia is a great S tier option, really good into short range compositions. I think she can output huge amounts of damage and can really stomp a lot of matchups, especially with the mid elo, if you are comfortable playing the champion. Cho'Gath probably sits towards the lower end of the S tier. I think people have actually learned how to play against the Cho'Gath build more than anything, because his win rate has been gradually decreasing by patch, and the nerf towards Symbiotic Souls, I think, will going into 25.9 will be another meaningful hit towards this build. It will probably drop him down to the A tier. I think the champion still scales incredibly well though at the moment, and if you are looking for a good AP tank option, I think Cho'Gath is still a great pick there for you. I would put... I think Malzahar towards the lower of the S tier, mostly because I have him here as like a really easy to play, wave clear, good low elo option. I think this champion simplifies one of the like maybe harder things for a lot of people to kind of like get like master early on, which is like just pushing and like wave management. And I think yeah, Malzahar trivializes that, and that can be really powerful when playing a champion when you're looking to climb to maybe like diamond to master. I think he's a great option in that regard. I would put maybe Neferi as the next option here. I think Neferi is, well, I mean, I had her down to the A tier with the hotfix nerfs. I think she's still an S tier option. The changes going into 25.9, I don't think will move her either. I think she'll remain as an S tier option. So Neferi and honestly Yasuo are like my two recommended AD S tier picks at the moment. I think you're very comfortable playing Yasuo. He's in a very, very powerful spot at the moment. But if you're looking for something a bit on the like the come up at the moment, I think Neferi is like very much that. She's obviously going to eat a huge amount of ban rate though. She is an incredibly powerful jungler in her current state, and yeah, she is going to remain as an S tier option in the mid lane. Just be careful because her ban rate is obviously very high. And then Vladimir has been gradually just rising up the tier list as time has gone on. I think this pick is an incredibly powerful spot at the moment. It's both a mid lane and a top lane option. If you get him in the right matchups, he can bully out champions, and even in bad matchups, he can oftentimes just scale and still take over games. I think Vladimir is a great champion to play at the moment, and I really recommend learning him if you haven't already. That being said though, I think the two picks which I recommend the most are Anivia and Diana. Anivia really benefits from Aurora changes. She is going to suffer going to 25.9, but item is being nerfed, so I could mark her down slightly for that if you are looking for a champion to like learn and play at the moment. But she's still really strong, and I think even with the Aurora nerf, she'll still sit as maybe even an S tier option, but like as a high A tier option at worst. In the case of Diana though, I think this champion is probably the most powerful slept on mid laner at the moment. She is an incredibly obnoxious like AP like harass assassin. She's great tools for just cleaving the wave. She doesn't scale that well, which I think people haven't really realized with this champion, maybe quite as much, but her early game is one of the strongest, if not just outright the strongest of an AP mid laner at the moment, so definitely give her a try. really learned the trading patterns of this champion. I think she is close to 3 LP at the moment if you are looking for a champion to climb all the way to Diamond. If you want to climb to Master, I think she can begin to struggle within that region, but Diana in an incredibly good spot at the moment. Definitely recommend learning the champion. The buffs you received more recently were... I mean, she received jungle nerfs, but she received buffs towards her base kit, and that really helped her. I do think this champion is a great S tier option. My recommended picks of the patch are, yeah, Diana, Anivia, and if you're looking for AD options, probably something like Neferu, Yasuo. If you're looking for something a bit easier, then, yeah, Malzahar, Galio can be great facilitators for that. So, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.